Excellent. Good. Well, thank you. And it's great to join everyone here tonight. It's been absolutely fantastic to hear the presentations so far. And it's been interesting, the importance of official plans in these presentations. We heard from Jane Fogel about Halton and the fantastic things that are happening there, about Divya and just the importance of these official plans in Brampton and Mississauga. I want to just kind of backtrack a step and just kind of touch base on just what are official plans, make sure we understand them, make sure you understand how they can influence our future and why you need to be using them in your community. So the first part really is what is an official plan? And quite simply, it's the primary plan that guides the long-term growth and development in a region, a county, a city, or a municipality. And then the sad thing is most citizens will never read an official plan, and yet they impact them daily. So for example, in Waterloo Region here, the region of Waterloo is our upper tier municipality, has a regional official plan, and then our 7 local municipalities, which we've got 4 rural ones, 4 rural townships, and 3 urban cities. They have their own respective official plans that have to be in conformity with each other. So the lower tier plans are given about a year after the upper tier plan comes in to be brought into conformity, and they all work together to guide things in our community. And what it guides and decides is where and how our urban and rural areas will grow, or if at all they'll grow, as we just heard about in Halton, where we will put housing and what type of housing we will build. Will it be apartments or singles or semis or townhomes? Where and how to locate jobs? Will they be vast industrial parks or employment areas or that? And it also decides all kinds of other things. How are we going to protect our farmland, the environment? What are we going to do to prepare for climate change? And it's really creative actually to see a lot of the things that different communities work into their integrated official plans. Even things like street lighting and keeping dark skies at night. There's all kinds of protected significant valley lands and wetlands. There's all kinds of interesting things that can be worked into official plans, and why these are just such important documents. And really, this is all part of a municipal comprehensive review process, or an MCR process. And the province decides, as we saw earlier on the registry, when these plans are going to get updated. Generates about every 10 years, and there's a small review at the 5-year point. And Doug Ford has mandated that we have until July 1st of 2022 is the deadline for most upper tier municipalities to complete their MCR, their municipal comprehensive review, or their official plan. So really time is ticking on this one. There's some new things with our official plans this time that can be viewed as either good or bad. One of them is that the planning horizon has been extended from 20 years to 30 years. And so where normally these plans just kind of look 20 years into the future, now we have to look all the way to 2051, which is kind of scary when we can't even really predict, who's going back to the office next month. How can we figure out how much office space our community is going to need 30 years from now? There's also been other changes to things like population forecasts, and they've been increased significantly by the province in many areas. And one confusing thing with the population forecast is one branch of the government or one ministry, their forecasts don't even often agree with another forecast. So municipal affairs and housing forecast for your community could be different than the Ministry of Finance forecast for your community. So who do you believe, particularly if they're off by 20 or 30,000 people? One other really big difference this time is there's far different population allocations. There's far less growth being directed or allocated into Toronto in the future years, with a lot more into the surrounding suburbs. And this is actually quite contrary to all market trends from the past 20 years, where we've seen Toronto really excelling with a lot of growth in the core, and a lot of people saying, no, we want to live in a core area and not way out in far-flung suburbs. So it's going to be interesting to see how these allocations work out when they're so different than reality. So, for example, here in Waterloo Region, where they're projecting that by 2051, we'll have about 923,000 people, which is about 330,000 people, or about 50% more than we have right now. But what's significant about that is that's also about 100,000 more than what we'd been anticipating for. We built the light rail transit here, anticipating about 830,000 people, and now all of a sudden we're being told 923,000. That's a big difference. On average, these numbers work out to it's about 10,000 people a year are moving into our community. That works out to about a busload of people every day or two. 30 to 27 to 30 people a day, which is a lot of people because it's not just people. That means that each and every day, we have perhaps as many as 30 new cars coming to our region. Over a week, 200 plus new cars a week, every week, week after week after week. That really adds up. It also means it's that many more houses or apartments or townhomes we need. And likewise, jobs. We are going to have to accommodate 470,000 jobs across our region by 2051, which has vast implications for employment lands, or even just trying to figure out where people are going to be working. How many people will be working from home in 2051? There's a lot of challenges here. And this just isn't Waterloo Region. I'm speaking a lot to Waterloo because that's where I'm from, and Smart Growth Waterloo Region that I'm involved with, we're most familiar with. But this is consistent across the province. Most parts of Ontario are expected to see about a 50% population growth in southern and southwestern Ontario and the greater Golden Horseshoe. And that equates to some massive numbers. That's 1 million people in the GTA area in the next 5 years alone. And as I mentioned, that's not just people, but that's suddenly now 1 million more cars, or potentially, unless we do something about it. And if anyone's tried to get on the 401 recently, I'm not quite sure where we're going to put another 1 million cars.
Evan,
there's also, yes.
Do you have a do you have a slideshow, or is it just one graphic?
No. The slides should be changing. Are they not changing?
I think in your multiple 5 screens you have available, your slideshow isn't actually advancing. It's still stuck on your front.
All right. I'm glad you brought that up. Let me stop sharing and I'll restart the sharing again. Thank you for bringing that up. And I'm not quite sure why, but let me try this again. Okay, so hopefully you see a screen now titled MCR Changes.
Correct.
All right, excellent. So we'll try this again. So some of the things here that that we're seeing that have been changed dramatically by the Ford government are some of the targets. And so sometimes these targets are moving in the opposite direction of what we might be expecting, particularly in light of climate change and such. So for example, what used to be a 60% target rate for intensification has been lowered to just a 50% rate of intensification. 80 in people and jobs per hectare has been lowered down to just 50 people and jobs per hectare. And these numbers, which sound technical, really have big impacts when it comes to the amount of land required to house the same number of people, or for employment areas, or even if we're going to have the population density in areas to support adequate transit. So hopefully that slide changed this time, Stephanie.
Yes, it did.
Excellent, great. Okay, good. Some other changes to our official plans or municipal comprehensive reviews is that the official plans are now no longer appealable. And that can have both good things or bad things. It means that in situations like Waterloo Region, where last time in 2009, our official plan was delayed in courts for 6 years, when every single word of it was appealed by developers because they didn't like how progressive it was. And it really held things up and cost millions of dollars to defend. It also means, though, that developers or land speculators who are hoping to have their lands brought into an urban envelope for development now only have a few more months to get their lands brought into that urban envelope and approved for development, or there might be little other chance for the next 30 years, or potentially the rest of their lives, if you figure out what's the average age of a developer or such now, to get their money back out of these lands or cash in. And when you look at the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been spent speculating on farmland, the pressure being put on our councillors right now and elected officials is simply unprecedented. So in some ways, I think our premier was hoping by locking things in for 30 years, there would be a massive land reserve banked in there, and people could drag profits out of it for years to come. On the other hand, though, it's putting huge pressure to over-designate right now and get it in now while people can. So huge challenges on that. Looking at some of these numbers and terminologies that I'm throwing around here, just what is intensification? Intensification is just simply the percentage of building permits issued within the existing urban area. So when we hear 65% intensification, that means that 65% of the building permits are basically going within the built urban boundary, and only 35% would be greenfield development or out in what has just been recently most likely farm fields. And when we talk about what is density, the density is people and jobs per hectare, which is how many people and jobs are we fitting in per hectare. But it sounds simple, but it can actually be really complex too, because you can take out things. You don't count cemeteries, you don't count wetlands, you don't count parkland and things like that. So those numbers can be actually manipulated a little bit. And then there's even just differences. For example, in multi-generational communities such as Brampton, we'll find that there's actually about 3.4 people living in on average in a house, where in Waterloo, it tends to be lower and just 2.6 people per resident. So there's lots of differences around the region. So we really have to be careful with intensification and density numbers. Other terminology, urban boundary is just simply the boundary where growth has been approved to at the edge of a city or town. In some places like Waterloo, you might see terminology such as countryside line, which is just a permanent boundary we put around our communities in which no further growth will be allowed. Or the protected countryside is a local version of the Greenbelt in places where there isn't the provincial Greenbelt in parts of Ontario. So normally the development of an official plan is about a 1 to 2 year long process. However, right now, a lot of regions across the province are delayed because of the pandemic and staff turnover. So for example, here in Waterloo Region, our official plan started back in autumn of 2019. And they started asking questions of what's our vision for the future, and getting population and employment forecasts and mapping and trying to figure out the technical analysis. And then those were pulled together by just this past autumn into some scenarios. And our staff came forward a little bit similar as Councillor Fogler suggested earlier this evening of, here's 3 different scenarios on how we could accommodate growth. And then that will go into the next step here in Waterloo Region over the next little bit, which is the land needs analysis, which is figuring out where exactly will that growth go, which could be which farms get paved over in which municipalities, if we decide we're actually going to have boundary expansions and that. Then from there, it gets into working documents, hopefully lots of public engagement and consultation. It then starts to get into the approvals as it goes through various committees and council. By law, under Section 26 of the Planning Act, there has to be an official public open house, and then the final approval has to get in by July 1st. So there's a lot to happen here in a little bit of time. And unofficially right now, some of the consultants in the province are saying about half of the municipalities out there are likely to miss this July 1st deadline. So not quite sure what the repercussions of that is going to be. We heard then again in Halton how quickly they had to organize and move just in the last 6 weeks. It may be the same in your community. But in the end, this is our biggest chance to dream about what we want to become in the decades ahead and put these plans into place. And it's so important that we all speak up for the future that we want to see. And we know, as we've heard from the Climate Reality Project and others, that the climate change solutions are implemented, the most effective ones, the most important ones, at the local level. And it's going to be our decisions on where and how we live and get around our communities, our housing choice, and that is going to be what makes the big impacts. So tell your story, get out there and voice your concern, connect to the hearts and minds of your local elected officials and staff. Try to figure out as a community what targets you should be seeking. Should it be 60% intensification or 70% intensification? Some, like the city of Waterloo, is aiming for 100% intensification as they're built out to their boundaries and decided that they're not going to annex neighboring townships and continue the sprawl, but simply like Manhattan, the island of Manhattan hasn't had a new acre of real estate in 100 years, and yet continues to be a thriving, dynamic, desirable place to live by growing up instead of out. And that's what we're seeing, for example, in Hamilton and Halton now, where they're deciding, let's not lose our farmland, let's stay within our boundaries, let's look at ways we can intensify and grow in a more sustainable manner. Maybe there's options that where there's no residential greenfield expansion only, but still some for industrial or employment lands. It doesn't have to be just one or the other. You could be creative with how you do this, or if you know you can't win on every front, you still may be able to win on some fronts. I think it's so important that we don't let land speculators determine the future of our communities. Most often it's these developers and folks who are most involved and engaged with our planning staff and politicians. So we need to make sure we're just engaged, and that people and groups from all parts of our community are speaking up and are heard. You know, everyone has an interest in our future and has opinions on what they want. So go out and work together with those citizens and ensure everyone is better involved and better informed, just like what we've seen in Hamilton and Halton. And hopefully we can speak up for the future that you want to see. So thank you very much. And I'm not quite sure if there's questions or if we have time for questions, but hopefully you'll get out and do amazing things in your community.
Thank you, Kevin. That was brilliant. We do have some questions. Let's just see here.
Yeah, so I think what we're going to do is, if all the speakers who are here, if all the speakers can, I guess, turn on your cameras, and then basically I'm going to share with Amy if we want to ask questions, and whatever speaker wants to dive in and answer. I think that'd work well.
Sure. We have one right now specifically for you, Kevin. Why is an official plan important when councillors continue to approve OP amendments using their upper tier documents and directives? And that's from John.
Yeah, excellent question. And you're right, you can bring in an OPA or an official plan amendment. It can actually be rather difficult to do and often a very costly process, depending on what sort of amendment you're trying to bring in. Often there's assessments or studies or things like that possible. But you know, it's one of those things where it's better to get these plans written and have our entire community working towards that shared vision or goal from the onset. We can't underestimate how many things flow out of these official plans. There's all kinds of master plans, master transportation plans, master wastewater servicing plans, a water treatment plan. There are all kinds of master plans all flow out of these official plans. And yes, you can try to bring in an OPA and an amendment, and they do allow ways to be able to adjust some things down the road. But on the other hand, that's designed just to be, you know, minor amendments or adjustments, course corrections, that sort of thing. It's far better off to get these things done correctly. And that's actually one of the concerns with such tight timelines between now and July 1st, the deadline, the pandemic, so many unknown questions, and so many municipalities running behind. There are questions on, you know, why are we breaking our neck to try to meet these arbitrary deadlines? There's also questions being asked of, you know, with an election in June, is that likely to change the provincial government we may have in power in July with the day that these plans are due? And will differing governments or differing political parties have different ideas or visions on growth? So might we be racing to complete something that the minute we get to the finish line, suddenly things have changed? So lots of questions we need to be asking within our community and within our province.
Thanks. Kevin, I'm sure you can answer this, but I'm not too sure if someone else could answer it. Stacey Wilson was asking about the impact of MZOs on official plans. Or yeah, I know that Stacey also asked earlier on, you know, what are next steps? So maybe someone else can speak to this later on. Yeah. But what is next steps after an MZO has gone past council, and what types of engagement should the community take?
Yeah, excellent question. And in many ways, MZOs are completely separate from official plans. It's a zoning order through the minister. Yes, they do all tie back into the same minister. But we did actually have a situation here in Wilmot Township that Stephanie will be quite familiar with as well, where we just had our MZO that was launched recently by a developer who didn't like what was happening in our official plan and tried to use the MZO purposely to use a lower tier government to bypass our upper tier government and basically use them as a battering ram or a club to get out of them what they wanted, or to just bypass them completely. And so the good news is we were able to get that MZO defeated. That developer since agreed they'll work through the proper planning process. But as much as MZOs and official plans are separate beasts, we have just seen here recently where one was trying to be used to bypass the other. So there is some connections to them. in the end, MZOs should only really ever be used in extreme circumstances. And we're seeing an abuse, as the Auditor General has called out quite clearly on them, and an unprecedented use of them and unprecedented numbers of them recently. So hopefully that is something we don't see in the future, because that's not what they were intended for.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think what one point to make was because thank you, Kevin, for catching this on December 24th.
Right.
You saw the notice that this developer was going to bring the proposal of the MZO before council in order to get their approval and their support for the zone change of the land from agriculture to residential or mixed use. And because we caught that, we were able to quickly get an action and engage with our councils very quickly, which then pushed the meeting time back, which then allowed the community members to phone call and email and, you know, really engage with the council, to what point the developer actually withdrew their request of the support from council for this MZO. So the MZO didn't actually reach the minister. It was still at the council level, the municipal level. And I think a lot of times we need to be able to catch that, but we don't understand when that goes before council, because it's just a zone change. And so, you know, having people that are watching the council agendas constantly and being able to act as that person that can put the red flag out. You know, back in the day when you had the telephone, I don't remember, you know, where one person got sick or something happened, you phoned 5 people and then they phoned 5 people. We need to go back to that, where, you know, if someone catches something, it can act very quickly and spread across the community that we need to act now. And because of that, we were able to convince the developer that it wasn't in his best interest to move forward into the actual filing the MZO.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any, or sorry, Kevin, did you want to say something?
No, and indeed, we got a little bit lucky in some ways, just because there are some aspects of this MZO that were just so egregious. The fact that they posted it on Christmas Eve with the meeting decision to be made on at dinner time on the very first day back over the holidays, with no information posted about it on the council website, with no ability to get media coverage on it or even reach staff. You know, there was just so many things that were just so egregious about this MZO that isn't always going to be the case. But you're right. We have to be vigilant. We can't underestimate the lengths that these developers or land speculators will go to right now, in particular, because they know they've got a rapidly closing window to realize these investments or perhaps be locked out for decades.